Hey there, guys. It's me, Elk, MAVCS, hopefully graduating grad student. I'm here today for a symposium, and I wanted to thank you all for being here. I also wanted to give a shout out to Karen Morris, Christy McGuire, and Connor Stay for being my thesis readers, and also for Joseph Grigley, who recommended that I become a YouTuber. So here we are. Like, comment, subscribe at Elk Papa. All right, so I'm taking you around my website today. This is what I did for my thesis project. It's called 4dtime.space, and it's basically all about four-dimensionalism. Now, what is four-dimensionalism, you might ask? Well, don't worry about it. It's all contained in here. This is supposed to be like a primer for people who have no familiarity with the philosophy of time or with comics theory or really anything. Like, it's just starting from scratch. So, as you can see, there's a little blurb up here that you can read, a little intro that's not necessary, but it's still fun. Just giving kind of like my background and, who inspired me and things like that. And then these are the main modules here. So you can see there's a little, if you hover over each one, it'll tell you what section you're looking at. So we'll be diving into those. You can think of each one of these as sort of like a wormhole. So you're going to be jumping to a different topic at a different point in time. Maybe linearly you can read it in terms of how I lay out my argument, but technically you can start or stop anywhere on the website and you'll get where you need to go in terms of information. And down here, just wrapping up the home page, we've got this little nugget down here. Might put an overlay on that, so don't judge me, but this guy is basically my origin story, and I have a printed copy of that I made also that I was going to bring to symposium/exhibition. If you want a copy of it, you can get in touch with me, as I said, at Elk Papa. I have, under the About Me section, some links on how to contact me if you wanted to buy a physical copy. Other than that, I've got a bibliography that is way too long and a sitemap in case you get lost or if you want to know where to go. So I guess we'll just start at the beginning. A good place to start. Fourth dimension. So, this is just the first little opening here. But seriously though, what is time? Time is a feature of our universe, inseparable from matter. Just as an object can't have length without width, you can't have matter that exists outside of time. Some refer to time as the fourth dimension, since it works in tandem with the three dimensions we can see. The view that time has a spatial component, which comprises the fourth dimension, is called four-dimensionalism. I, my friends, am a four-dimensionalist. So, another fun part about this website is I have a lot of little Easter eggs that I planted around. So, like, for instance, if you hover over four-dimensionalism, and I don't think I can record this, but it takes you to the Wikipedia page on four-dimensionalism. I have a lot of embedded links. So if you just like hover on objects, if you're on a desktop computer, then you can find a lot of cool secrets. Or just like, definitions of terms, links to YouTube videos that explain a topic in more detail so I don't waste your time on the site if you already know about it. So in this section, I basically do a rundown of the history of four-dimensionalism in different cultures. And then I go into Charles Hinton, who basically was like the guy that popularized the fourth dimension and actually invented the hypercube, which is a 4D cube. And then I basically go through his text talking about world lines and block universe theory, which is basically, where I'm going for the rest of this. I close this section by talking about basically all of the artists in the early to mid 1900s who were obsessed with the fourth dimension, which is where I started out in my research in Christie's class last year. And then I asked the question like, well, why? Like, why is art a good way of exploring the fourth dimension? And I continue. So you can hit home or next. I'm going to hit next just because that goes to a good section. But if you wanted to go home and jump somewhere else, you don't have to read it in order. I'm just going to go to the 4DI because this is kind of the fun part. if you like geometry, which I like geometry. So I use this book called Hypergraphics to basically help the reader slash viewer visualize four dimensions. And I feel like this is just a good place to start, because if you want to understand the fourth dimension as like space time, you have to consider the fourth dimension as a spatial dimension that exists on top of, or, in accordance with and alongside our three dimensions that we can see. The only thing is that we don't see time. So now we're going to try and, at least mathematically speaking, help you visualize four dimensions using geometry, which is dope. But yeah, I won't go into too much detail, because this is just a relationship that you'll have to take with yourself. But this part is pretty important. Since a 4D object casts a 3D shadow, a 4D subject must cast a 3D shadow as well. So if the 4D hypersubject is the analog of the static 3D subject, what is the 2D analog of said 3D subject? And that is the subject of this comic, essentially. Here's Carl Sagan asking, like, what does a 2D slice of a 3D object like this apple here, you can make a stamp out of it and you get a two-dimensional expression of a 3D object. So what does a 3D stamp of a 4D object look like? What is a 3D slice of 4D space-time? And then we go into possibly one of my favorites. Actually, no, I love all of the sections on this website, I'm not going to lie. This is where I go into my own unique idea, which I call the space-time sausage. So in block universe theory, which is the type of four-dimensionalism that I am really into, we think of all of space-time, which is like matter, the 3D world that we can see, and time as like one unmoving four-dimensional block, where everything that exists across every timeline, in the universe exists in this 4D chunk. So this little guy is called a world line. That red line right there, that could be, like my life. My life has a world line. It has a 4D extension that basically supersedes my 3D expression. It's basically like, they call it the worm view, because that little world line, that actually has like a four-dimensional shape and texture, sort of like a worm. This is where I talk about Donnie Darko, which is kind of funny. But I use the idea of a sausage because it helps you get into the notion of temporal parts. So each slice of a sausage, say, is a moment in your life, a certain chunk of time that expresses you at that moment. So like, for instance, this current slice of space-time that I'm occupying in grad school could be considered a slice of my space-time sausage. It's a part of the whole. So this is where I talk about movement through space-time. Get a little, I don't need to go into any detail. Dune reference. But yeah, so that's basically most of my setup. Obviously I end up later talking about film theory as well as comics theory, and that's really when I get into the dirt, right? So the moving present is the section where I basically argue that every slice of now that exists is interdependent of one another. So technically, there's Hermann Minkowski, and there's his wonderful diagram that I borrow. Basically, what's called the hypersurface is the present, is the current slice of space-time that we occupy. So these light cones here are both relative to the observer, us, who are in the middle of this hypersurface, right? So all of the events that have existed that make up who we are and how we got here do exist in relation to this present, as do all of the things that result from this past and what is happening in the present. That's the future light cone, right? So we're saying that time, or at least the hypersurface of the present, the moving present, is centered on the observer. We go into that. So then we get back into the world line idea, right? So since the hypersurface of the present is constantly moving, and yet you do exist as separate slices along that world line, you can start thinking of that 4D expression as we were talking about, right? Because, okay, each present on your world line in sum creates you. Very important. Now I'm going back over here. Which one is the one where we talk about film? I think it is this one. It's the next section. Okay, doing a little more geometry here, but this is really the meat of my argument is in this section, and then the following 3 sections are basically just extrapolations that I've made beyond that. So here's when I make my own diagrams, which is pretty dope. So basically I make the argument that if you take a 2D plane and juxtapose it on a z-axis across a coordinate plane, you can assign the z-axis to anything. So we'll make the z-axis on this diagram time. So we've got length and height or width or whatever, you know, the 2 axes, x and y axes, right? That make up a 2-dimensional space. And then we add the dimension of time, and that creates the illusion of 4-dimensionalism, right? So we have a 3-dimensional object here, where the 3rd dimension it's expressing is in time. So we're gonna relate this to how film works. We've got each frame here consists of a plane, and they superimpose across time by being illuminated. That's how we get a movie. But the crazy part is that so through the movement of the images that are illuminated, we get time, we get temporality. So we've got width, height, and time as our 3 dimensions. But what's crazy is that the film reel itself is a physical object that contains thickness or width. That is our 4th dimension. So we can think of a reel of film as a 4D hyper object or a space-time sausage, where each frame is a slice and together they create a 4D chunk of space-time. So like when you look at a reel of film, you can think in your mind's eye, like, okay, you know, maybe in like Casablanca or something, like, you know, we're at Rick's at about here, and then over here, you know, we're saying goodbye to that Bergman lady or whatever. You can conceptualize the entire film in your mind as a hyper object, right? So that's what I'm getting at. We can do what this is with film, but we can apply it not just to comics, but also to your own life. So that's the bulk of my argument. Yay, you just made your first 4D hyper object. That's it. Yeah, I mean, in the rest of this section, and I encourage you obviously to read all of this online, just give a brief outline of how this applies to comics, and then I'll give you a little preview of the other sections and we'll call it. So yeah, right here, just how cinema has the frame of film, comics have the panel, right? So that's a 2D frame in itself. And then we have a hyperframe, which is a page. So instead of being spread out over time, it's spread out over a page. It's spatial, right? Each frame relates to the others and is read through the connection it has with the other images and with the page as a whole. So we're talking about interdependence of panels around each other in order to create the illusion of time passing through spatialization, right? Any panel can be the present while the reader is reading it. Each panel is past, present, and future simultaneously, a slice of the eternal space-time sausage of the book itself, right? So we get each frame is a 2D slice, and together make a block of space-time through the book object. The thickness of the book is akin to the thickness of the reel. But here's the catch. Unlike film, where, you know, you just have light passing through the reel that creates this temporal movement, the flow of time is in fact controlled by the reader in a comic. So that happens during the gutter. The reader takes the mental leap to the next panel completely in control of the flow of the story. So the reader actually gets to control the flow of time. So the movement of the eye takes place for the movement of the movie camera, or projector rather. So yeah, here's Scott McCloud. So Scott McCloud is basically like the other guy that has talked about comics formalism in comics form. So the closure that happens in the gutters in a comic is where the real magic happens. Because each one of those frames, unlike in film, in comics, that slice of space-time can literally be any amount of time. It could be a moment that lasts like this long, with just a sound effect. It could be someone's internal monologue that lasts an unknown amount of time. I go over that, what is a slice of space time, in the section called Zeno's Arrow that I didn't go over because you don't need to see that. So yeah, when you have those juxtaposed slices of space-time, it's really easy, as I say here, quoting Scott McCloud, to observe the parts while perceiving the whole, which is what I want people to get from block universe theory, but is also what people get when they read a comic book. So, as I say here, we can go further. Instead of just looking at panel to page or panel to panel relationships, we can look at, let's see, if a book is a space-time sausage, maybe a whole series is a space-time sausage, a block universe in and of itself. A panel could be a slice of a page a slice of a book, or a book a slice of a series. Each book creates a block universe where space-time is denoted through thickness in pages, where each page, every panel, entire books, and series all exist simultaneously. The now of the book is only the panel or page or volume that you're reading at any given time. So this guy, Enrique Del Rey Cabero, talks to us on Comics Grid, that you can click here, on how you can read comics page to page, but also across whole books. So I talk here about some examples. Can't talk about comics without talking about Watchmen. And then in this section's kind of an aside, but I still really like it. It's talking about how in Defense of Family Circus, if you have a one-panel comic, it gives you a sense of complete timelessness, like time outside of time. And then I talk about how Billy's dotted line is actually his world line, and how each comic on this website is a world line cutting through the block universe of this website, right? Closure is just the beginning. It is the N+1 of the comics form. Closure is a gateway to the infinite dimensionality that comics contains. Comics is the internet, blah, blah, blah. You get this trippy image here. So, yeah. After that, I have 3 more sections. This section is on how I consider my own autobiographical work to create a space-time sausage of me that exists as a 4D hyperobject, so that's pretty trippy. Then in this section we talk about string theory and how that can relate to block universe theory, and basically giving us a general, more theoretical physics-grounded cosmology and how we can place the block universe theory, which is a philosophical concept, into like reality, like in actual science. And then the final section, well, not final, you can read these at any time, as I said, but the final section that I'm talking about now is the corkscrew block universe, which is also another one of my own inventions that I show through here. So we're talking about, right up here, we're talking about how do we feel like time is passing, or why does time move only in one direction? Blah, blah, blah. We're talking about cycles of time, right? So here's me praying to some wheat goddess. I'm talking about different forms of secular calendars that different cultures have developed. This is the Wheel of Life, or the Wheel of Becoming in Buddhism. Oh, and here, it's Friedrich Nietzsche! It's your boy! All right. Here we talk about fatalism and his most popular, well, I don't know. One thing that I appreciate about his work is the idea of eternal recurrence. Because that really does dovetail with block universe theory. It's like, well, what about free will? Isn't it kind of depressing that we live in this 4D chunk of space-time, like flies trapped in amber, and we can't escape? We're just like totally sucked into our fate. And that's when we go into, here I'm just talking with Nietzsche about all the books of his that I've read. And then he brings up amor fati, or the love of fate. So it's basically the idea that you don't just bear fate, you love it. Let's see. If our soul has trembled with happiness just once, all eternity was needed to produce this one event. And in this single moment of affirmation, all eternity was called good, redeemed, justified, and affirmed. And I agree with that. So here we're talking about the idea of a book, right? You could reread a book over and over and over and over again, and just because you know who done it by the end of the book doesn't mean you're not going to read it again because it's enjoyable. And here I talk about the death of Superman. I'm just being a dork. And here we get to the corkscrew. So we talk about cycles of time repeating while moving forward into infinity. The movement of time, remains cyclical and has forward motion, so that basically accounts for the arrow of time, which only moves forward, and this creates a 4D tube. And guess what? It's the block universe. I did it again. All right. Smaller circular motions articulate a larger forward movement. You can think of your world line as moving in a similar motion, carving your way through the block universe. So this attends to our fears about the feeling of the passage of time, and also shows us through existentialism how to escape from fatalism and nihilism by having a love of fate. As I said here, you don't have to go for that, but whatever. That's just makes me feel better. So, that's basically the gist of my site. Thank you guys so much for listening. I hope that you enjoyed it, and I hope that you give it a look. It's all live online. You could read it right now. I'd wait a couple weeks before doing mobile because I'm still doing some updates. With Andrew Olmsted, my collaborator, who basically taught me how to code, which is how I made this website. It is also all on GitHub if you want to look at the code. So that's a cool feature also. But yeah, thank you, Andrew Olmsted. Thank you to the staff of the VCS department, faculty, friends. And I wish you guys a very happy symposium. And yeah, thank you so much. Bye.